Hello, and welcome to the Psychologist Mind podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Brandon Gamble. I'm an educational psychologist, professor, consultant, and coach. So psychology is the study of how to explain, predict, and modify behavior. However, for those who look at what the ancients in Africa knew, it was the enlivenment and the illumination of the soul. Today, I want to talk about critical race theory and how I've applied it in my work as a psychologist. So I have a few quotes today to begin with, and these are actually coming from memes on the internet about critical race theory and the debate that's going on with critical race theory. And the first one says, banning the teaching of systemic racism is actually a perfect example of systemic racism. The next quote says, you know what's ill about the CRT debate? All of the efforts to stop it have actually encouraged more educators to learn about it than ever before. In my whole educational career, I've never heard more K-12 educators referencing this framework than I have over the last few months. And that is a quote from S. Brown at Teachers for the Culture. So, I wanted to talk today, in a way that's not so much about the debate, because there's plenty of great articles that are going on about the debate. But I really simply want to encourage people to know what critical race theory is about and read it. So that's what I'm going to share today and how I apply it as a psychologist, because I've taught it for at least 12 years. So Derek Bell, who's really considered the originator of the concepts that go with critical race theory, coming out of critical studies, which come out of the Frankfurt School. And if you are a real deep scholar, you'll look up the Frankfurt School and you'll get an idea of criticisms. People who were criticizing, communism, Marxism, capitalism in Frankfurt, in Germany, but they were going after these things because they realized that the world was changing rapidly. So critical race theory specifically looks at criticisms of the civil rights movement and where it left off. So I'm quoting Derek Bell here, and the late professor, in his book, Ethical Ambition, Living a Life of Meaning and Worth. And he says, courage is a decision you make to act in a way that works through your own fear for the greater good as opposed to pure self-interest. Courage means putting at risk your immediate self-interest for what you believe is right. And those are some powerful words from Derek Bell on courage. So in the news more recently, June 22nd, NPR, All Things Considered, with Professor Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings. And I'm a bit of a fan of Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, so I'm going to fanboy out more than enough today. But I would just want you to know how much I like her work, because when I started graduate school in 1995, she was writing about critical race theory. And I'll tell you some more about her thoughts there. But more recently, she said, so critical race theory is a series of theoretical propositions that suggest that race and racism are normal, not aberrant in American life. It relies on several tenets that include things like interest convergence. The notion that, you can get something done if you can convince the opposition that it's in their interest too. Things like counter storytelling or narratives. And I know when people hear storytelling, they say, that's not empirical. But if you've ever been in a court of law, especially, everybody's telling a story. They have the same set of facts. They tell the story differently. So this idea of critical race theory not being grounded in empiricism is off. It's actually grounded in historical or legal empiricism, taking a look, and that's what Dr. Derek Bell did. He took a look at several court cases, and he continued to look at court cases that were changing American life very rapidly from the 1970s through the 90s and 2000s. So some of the concepts of critical race theory, particularly from education as written about by Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings and her colleague, university president, Dr. William Tate. Critical race theory in education is like legal scholarship. So it's like this legal scholarship, but it develops four propositions. And I'm specifically talking about in education. And why am I focused on education? Well, one, I'm an educational psychologist. But two, if you're a psychologist and you're using your mind to apply this theory, it is really about change work. How do we change either large groups or particular individual and provide them a better life? So first, we begin with the idea, and as you heard in the quote from Dr. Ladson-Billings, race continues to be significant in the United States. Next, U.S. society is based on property rights rather than human rights. And I'm just going to pause here because this really changed how I viewed my efforts to support students, efforts to support clients who are receiving psychological services or counseling or mental health support because they needed access to property. As nice as we wanted to be to them, as kind as we wanted to be to them, really it came down to who's getting the best service. Let's keep going. Third, the intersection of race and property creates an analytical tool for understanding inequity. So if I'm talking about a school system, if I'm talking about a mental health system, I'm looking at how I am seeing people's access based upon their ethnicity or based upon the construct that we commonly know as race, which doesn't really exist to the degree that we used to think it did. But nonetheless, it's still worth looking at when it comes to property because the United States was based upon this. Now, here's the fourth one, which I know a lot of people have a hard time with, but if you're following the readings and getting deep into them, you'll understand it a little bit more. So I'm going to break it down. Whiteness. Whiteness can go beyond skin culture, attitude, and actions on behalf of the dominant culture. And whiteness is one type of property. For example, black people can be granted white privilege as honorary whites through tokenism, college degrees, even government offices. And there's many other ways, right? But that's one example. And it could happen for many other ethnic groups, right? So if I take a look at Jackie Robinson, Roberto Clemente, if I'm just talking sports, and I've even heard some commentators say, I can't wait for the first Muslim American baseball player to come and change how we view baseball because it will truly make it a global sport like basketball has. If I shift to business, right, and I'm looking at, the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, and India and China, right, and their access, right, before there was limited access, but now they're getting more access to business, right, these privileges of whiteness. So that's a more controversial tenet, but it helps us understand, it gives us an analytical tool to begin to understand when people aren't getting access. Sometimes it is about race. So they also borrow from the legal scholarship by focusing on interest convergence. And we talked about that, but I'll just break it down a little bit more. In effect, those in power will concede property if it benefits them to maintain power, gain money, or cultural assimilation of a subgroup that goes counter to their culture. So Ladson-Billings, she later wrote in 1998 that more should be done to extend critical race theory beyond storytelling and continued review and cataloging of legal cases. She was looking particularly in education. I would say for those psychologists who are listening, psychological legal cases or mental health legal cases to learn from and change the country and our current reality. So I'm going to give an example that I used when I was working with critical race theory in schools, and I was working with young people, particularly a young person who was in special ed. So as a psychologist, I look at breaking barriers to apply critical race theory in education and individual change work. So whether I'm mentoring someone, whether I'm a personal coach, or whether I'm providing counseling or doing an assessment, access is what I'm looking at when I'm using critical race theory. So a student I met when he was a freshman in high school stated he wanted to attend a 4-year college. He was a black male with dyslexia and a speech impediment. At his annual special education meeting, or his individualized education program, or IEP meeting, an administrator suggested that he could only be accepted to a community college given his challenges. And this was a white woman telling a black man or black boy, soon to be a man, that he should really lower his expectations. Also, moreover, his mother was in jail at the time and he was working to support his baby sister. So as a team, and this is us applying critical race theory, we sent that administrator away. Then we planned to get him access to a 4-year institution. Not only did he attend a highly selective 4-year college, but he persisted even to a master's degree and a doctorate. He now helps students get into college as his main job. So he attended my doctoral alma mater, the University of Southern California, Fight On. He has written 2 books. He has visited the White House to talk about dyslexia when Michelle Obama invited folks to come and speak about dyslexia. And he is still doing amazing work. I just want to give a shout out to my friend and fraternity brother, Dr. Keon Anderson, who continues to amaze folks who may put him in a box. Again, I applied critical race theory to his story in my work as a psychologist with him, but I'm looking broader at how you as a psychologist may begin to think about change work, or how you as someone who's working with a psychologist may begin to see how you can break down barriers utilizing critical race theory. So here's some of my recommendations as we close here. Man, you got to read it for yourself. So I have 2 articles that I would suggest people start off with. And again, fanboy, Gloria Ladson-Billings, the good doctor who's traveled all over the world telling people about not just critical race theory, but access for young people. Okay? So 2 articles. The first is Towards a Critical Race Theory in Education, which was written in 1995 by Drs. Gloria Ladson-Billings and William Tate. And the next is Just What is Critical Race Theory and What's It Doing in a Nice Field Like Education by Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings. Read it for yourself. Start there, because those 2 are I love her writing. It's always accessible. Dream Keepers is another great book that she's written, but let me not be too much of a fanboy. I only got a few minutes left, so let me break this down. Also, don't take it so personally. It is a tool, not a determinant about your life. It's simply an informational tool to look at why people may or may not have access to certain things. Next, remember it is used mostly for graduate students, not in K through 12 schools or even undergraduate courses. Most people who are looking at this are in master's degrees or doctoral programs. Number 4, the 4th recommendation, it is best applied when providing access for people who have been denied access due to race. If you want to see legal precedents, particularly in education, Brown versus Board of Education is a very important case. Before that, Mendes versus Westminster. And more recently, that still has impacts on the practice of psychology in my home state of California, Larry P. versus Riles. And there's many others, but you can take a look at those cases. Also, know that critical race theory is here to stay. And this is the 5th and final recommendation I have. Despite bans on it or legal action, you cannot kill an idea, especially when it is based on facts that came from the U.S. legal system. I'm just saying. So Martin Luther King, at his best, according to scholar Michael Eric Dyson, appealed to the American Constitution itself, appealed to Americanism. And I think that's an important part to end on this 4th of July. So next time, for more content, check out drbrandongamble.com. You can follow me in Dr. Brandon Gamble on Facebook, Our Black History Podcast, also the Gold Doctor Podcast, which is on Facebook, Spotify, Spreaker, YouTube, and at thegolddoctor.net. We're going to be having some interviews coming out soon, so I'm looking forward to that. So join me next time as we talk about the latest in psychology, news, concepts, and recommendations, and what is going on in this psychologist's mind. Peace.